hard to overestimate the attachment of the Jewish people to the city of Jerusalem. For example, years ago, where I'm standing was no man's land. Jordan controlled the old city, and Israel controlled the western part of the city. Here's CBN's Scott Ross discussing the 1967 Six-Day War that changed the history of the Middle East.
The Temple Mount is in our hands. The famous words of Commander Motta Gur, whose men helped reunite Jerusalem under Jewish sovereignty, fulfilling a 2,000-year-old dream.
This book is really a story of an Israeli band of brothers, young Israeli men who gave the Jewish people their greatest victory, I would say, in history, probably since the Exodus from Egypt. You know, suddenly we're born again as a people.
I spoke with American-born Israeli Yossi Klein Halevi about his book, Like Dreamers, the story of the Israeli paratroopers who reunited Jerusalem and divided a nation. Psalm 126, when God brings about the return to Zion, we were like dreamers. Then our mouths will be filled with laughter, our tongues with joyous song. And that's where you got the title. Halevi took me to the Mount of Olives overlooking the old city where Motta Gur commanded his troops.
The paratroopers came to this spot on the morning of June 7th, 1967. Motta Gur, a very famous photograph, is looking out onto the Temple Mount and making the final preparations in his mind for the descent and the conquest of the old city. So he says, paratroopers of Brigade 55. And he tells them that Jews waited thousands of years for this moment. You are the ones who are privileged to restore Jerusalem to the Jewish people.
We retraced their steps to Lion's Gate of the old city.
This is the gate that the paratroopers, the Israeli soldiers, entered on June 7th, 1967. And then when they reached the Temple Mount, the famous words of Motta Gur, the commander of the paratroopers, were, "The Temple Mount is in our hands." And they find the wall, and there are these incredibly emotional scenes of battle-hardened paratroopers, many of them secular, most of them secular, weeping at the wall.
So the prayer and the hope of many generations next year in Jerusalem came to pass.
Suddenly it becomes this year in Jerusalem.
Halevi personalizes the history of Israel since then through the eyes of 6 such dreamers.
I felt that what was missing in the way people relate to the story of Israel was that personal connection. Right. And I always wondered, you know, what happened to the guys who liberated the Western Wall in 1967? I grew up with that image as symbolizing the like dreamers story of Israel.
These paratroopers, do they really reflect and microcosm the story of this country?
The range that you have in this book are deeply religious people, West Bank settlers, secular Israelis, Tel Aviv residents, kibbutzniks, left-wingers. And it was very important for me to tell the story of the whole people of Israel. Because the way that I understand the Jewish people is that we're a family.
It took Halevi 12 of his 32 years in Israel to write the book.
One of my characters, Arik Achmon, starts off as a boy living on one of these socialist, radical socialist kibbutzim. He fights the trade unions, and he creates the first privatized company in the state of Israel and opens the way to the high-tech free economy that we have today.
One became known as Israel's Bob Dylan, and another started the settlement movement in Judea and Samaria. Halevi says his book tries to show the struggle within the Israeli soul over making peace with the Palestinians and dividing Jerusalem.
In my neighborhood, I've got Jewish neighbors, I've got Arab neighbors, in the same neighborhood, in the same building. Now, how do you separate that? How do you divide a city without, God forbid, destroying it? I don't see how Jerusalem can be shared between 2 political entities that are emerging out of a 100-year war.
And for people from my worldview and my Christian view, we take very seriously the psalmist when he says, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May they prosper who love you.
Yes.
As you sit here and as we look at this, how do you pray for this city?
I pray that I personally should be worthy of living here, of holding this story at this moment. I pray that the people of Israel will be worthy of this story. I pray for our strength. I pray for our generosity of spirit. I pray that we be protected from hatred, that our hearts be open to love all the people of this land and all those who turn toward the city with hope. And I pray for all of us, and that's my prayer.